This is April and Red. Welcome to our off-grid home build. Red just finished the exterior framing for our house, and now we are starting to build and install the metal beams that will support our roof.
Well, I'm finally getting ready to start on the roof beams, and I'm getting some scaffolding set up. This is adjustable scaffolding. You can adjust the height of the deck, and I got it up pretty much all the way. Here, April and I are laying out a couple of beams on the trailer, which I'm going to use as kind of a workbench to fabricate these. These beams are a little rusty, and so the first thing I'm doing here is I'm sanding some of the rust off and then painting them with a Rust-Oleum paint. So these are 8-inch tall beams, and they're C-purlins actually. So I'm going to be making the beams out of 2 C-purlins that are both 8-inch tall with 2.5-inch wide kind of wings, I guess you'd call them. So once you put them together, the beam will be 8 inches tall and 5 inches wide at the widest of the flanges. Here I have the beams back to back, and I'm starting to get them all straight on the trailer, kind of level. Since I have them laid on their side right now because I'm going to be drilling holes in them, the beams will flex a little bit in this orientation. And so I kind of shimmed them and got them all nice and level on the trailer because I want them to be level and straight before I put the bolts in. Because once I get the bolts in and tight, then it'll kind of hold it in that position. So once I got it straight, I kind of marked out the position for the holes and got them all started. Then I went back with some oil to lubricate the drill bit and then drilled on through. Here I'm putting the bolts in and getting ready to start clamping it together with the bolts. I decided to go ahead and screw in a wooden board that will serve as a stop. Basically, once we get this beam up on the walls, it'll slide in until it hits the 2x4 on the top rail and stop in the correct position. Just make it easy to get it oriented correctly. I also had to cut in a few notches for the spacer boards to go in, and so I'm measuring and laying that out here. Once that was in, I needed to paint the exposed parts. So basically, this foot of the beam will be an exposed eave. So I like the structural look of these beams and wanted that to be exposed on the eaves. And so since these are going to be exposed, we decided to go ahead and paint it now. Figured it'd be easier to paint now than later. So we're using a kind of a hammered paint finish, which I like. And this is antique pewter, and we're just spraying that and getting it ready to go. Once that was all finished, we were ready to put the first beam up. Our daughter was here helping, and between the three of us, we managed okay. These beams are about 175 pounds each, so pretty heavy, but we were able to manage it. I had screwed in some boards that stick up off the top there, but those are stops that keep the beam from falling off the edge once we get it up into place. Once we got it up there, it stayed in place pretty nicely, and we were able to drill the holes through the pre-drilled holes in the metal beams, drill the holes through the top rail of the walls, and then put in the bolts that will hold it in place. I had ordered the bolts for all of this from a bolt company prior to starting, and it turned out that I bought too long of bolts for this, which was frustrating. It would have worked if they would have been all thread bolts, but it was only the bottom inch of the bolts that were threaded, and so we had to find some other bolts, but it all worked out in the end. Once the beam was up, we needed to put on the 4-foot extension for the overhang on the front part of the house, and here's a little bit more about that. I'm here in my shop, and I wanted to show you what I'm doing here. So I'm getting ready to weld up another one of the extensions for the overhang on the south side of the house. Here I have one that I've already welded up. So basically I just get the two pieces, clamp them together. I've already cut the angle properly, 5 degrees, and then made up the shield plate that I weld on the end. So basically I just clamp them two together, weld them together, just stitch weld in 5 places on each side, and then put the shield plate on the end and weld that on, just tack weld it in 6 or 8 places around the perimeter there. And then I'm pretty much done with it. Before I start welding on it, I've already pre-drilled everything, so it's already pre-drilled and matches the beam that it's going to go on. So that's already complete. I'll just weld these up, and then I'll wipe them down with some good thinner and then paint them up real nice, and then I'll put them on. This is the first beam we did, and here I am clamping the whole thing already welded to the main beam so I can drill holes through all of it. And it was a little clumsy and difficult to do. We later learned that it was easier to pre-drill the holes before I welded everything together on this extension. So the reason we're using these extensions instead of one long beam that would encompass the whole thing is that we originally bought these beams for our aircrete home, and when we bought them, we were having difficulty with finding a good deal on some that could be delivered, and our trailer was only 20 feet long, and so we couldn't carry anything ourselves that was longer than 25 feet, because even that was quite a bit sticking out of the back of the trailer. So we weren't able to buy the 30-foot long that we wanted. We were just able to buy the 25-foot long. And so, but that works because the house is 24 feet wide, and so that gives us enough to have 1 foot sticking off the back end of the house as an eave. And then on this side, it comes up flush, and then we use this extension to create that 4 foot of overhang in the front. It also worked out well because I had ordered quite a bit of the 6-inch purlin because we were planning on our walls being structural with purlin and aircrete at the time. And we were going to use these 6-inch purlins for that. But since we're not using those, I had plenty of those to make these extensions out of. I decided I need to put in these wooden spacers between the beams as we go because they go inside the channel of the beams and kind of lock the beam in place, and it would be really difficult to put them in later. So you have to put them in as we go, before we put in the next beam. I'll show a little bit more later on those, how there's quite a bit of detail in those to make it all work together. Here I've got one kind of fabbed up, and I'm kind of toe-nailing it into the top structure or the top rail of the wall, and it's fitting in pretty nice, and doing one of those on either end and getting ready to put the next beam in place. This wooden spacer on the top side has a lot of detail because it has to be able to accommodate that extension bar that's going to slide into the channel on one side of the I-beam. And so that's what I'm doing here, is kind of cutting in notches and grooves to accommodate that channel. That's something that it took me a few times to perfect. These are 14 gauge C-purlins, and so putting 2 of them back to back makes quite a sturdy beam, even though it's not the typical usage. We came up with the idea to do it this way when we were doing our aircrete house design. It just seemed like a really effective way and cost-efficient way to create a strong and durable roof. We'll only have a few $1,000s invested in these roof beams, and that's just a fraction of the cost that we would have spent if we bought traditional wooden trusses. Also, I like that these will follow the pitch of the roof. We have a 2-foot rise over the width of the house, and so the interior roof will follow that pitch. So one side of the house will have nice 10-foot tall ceilings, and these beams allow us to take advantage of that and have tall ceilings on one side of the house and a nice pitched interior roof. We're ready to put up the second beam now, and it's just April and I this time. It worked out okay. We just had to kind of take our time and be careful and kind of help each other out and work back and forth on this beam to get it lifted up and into place. That wood block stop also makes it easy to get into proper place, and then I just needed to slide it in to these block boards that I had made on either end. I had already pre-drilled the holes for the bolts, so once in place I was able to just mark those spots with a marker and then scoot it out of the way and drill the holes with the drill, as you can see here, and then scoot it back into place and put the bolts through. This is on the south side here, the side that the extension goes through, and you can see the notches that I've made to be able to slide that 6-inch extension, 6-inch wide C-purlin extension through and then bolt it to this 8-inch beam. I'm using 2 3/8-inch bolts on either end to bolt it to the top rail of the wall. Those bolts should be enough by themselves, but also the spacer board will also help hold it in place and give it a lot of strength. It ended up being really complicated to get my spacer board cut correctly in order for this extension beam to slide in and still have it be all nice and really tight all the way around. And so it took some doing. And so here I am chiseling the board and chiseling the wood out, creating an angle and grooves and stuff for this all to slide in and fit in pretty tight. And this was kind of my first one that had to fit that way. And so I was kind of figuring it out on the fly. After this one, I was able to kind of perfect the method and get it all prefabbed before I ever put it up. And then they fit pretty good after that. I've made a couple more beams here, and April and I are getting ready to put the third beam in place. These really are heavy and unwieldy, and we're kind of having to work our way around construction supplies that are all over in the way, but we made it work. Our first step is to work together to put the end up on the scaffolding. Then we go to the other side, put the ladder in place, and put the other end up on the ladder or maybe up on the top rail if we could get it there. And then go back to the other side and put the other side back up onto the rail on the southern end of the house. Once we, got it up on the rails, then it was pretty easy to work with, but getting it up there is the difficult part. Once we get that all bolted into place, then it's time to put the front rail on. In this case, we got the ladder kind of set up and pretty secure, and they're pretty heavy, so I had April hold the ladder for me just to make sure it was stable and secure while I went up on the ladder and kind of slid it into place. A bit heavy and tricky, but it actually just slides in really nicely. Once it's in, it stays in place pretty well, and then it gives me time to get up on the ladder and kind of move it around and tweak it around until I can get all the bolts through, and then tighten it down. By the time we put up the fourth beam, we're getting into a little rhythm here, and also just learning how long this is taking. We started doing 2 beams at a time, and it takes about a day and a half to fabricate 2 beams and get them ready to go up. And then it takes about a half a day to actually get them up and get them in place and bolted onto the frame. So it's been taking us about 1 day per beam on average to get these up. There's only 14 beams in the house, so we expect to spend about 14 working days getting these beams fabricated and put in place. Here I am getting ready to put on another one of these extensions. This is actually the fun part. It's very satisfying to slide these into the grooves and finish out a beam. This particular beam was a little bit hard to get in. It was kind of getting stuck, and I didn't have quite enough room to get it in between the beam and that block board. So I had April get up there and kind of tweak on the beam a little bit, move it over just a little bit so I could slide it in the slot. Once we get it up, it can be a little bit tricky to get all the bolts in. They're precisely drilled to the exact size of the bolt, and so you have to get it lined up perfectly for them to go in. And so sometimes I'll use a clamp or whatever to kind of pick the beam up and move it around a little bit until I can get the holes to align sufficiently to where I can get those bolts in. This 4-foot overhang that we're doing here all along the south side will provide shade during the summer. The sun will actually never directly contact the south side of the house in the summertime, but when the sun drops down during the winter months, it'll shine directly on this wall and come in the windows to heat up the house. We're really excited to get these first 4 beams up. We like the way they look, and they seem like they're really going to be sturdy and strong. Also like the look of this overhang. It'll be exposed beams from the outside underneath, so we think it'll look pretty cool. So excited to see how it turns out.